I was watching some videos, and it's not just in videos I've seen this, it's just something that occurs very frequently, namely women complaining about not being liked for who they are and being judged and evaluated solely on their looks. And more specifically, men being interested in these women exclusively because of their looks. And you might be familiar with Dr. K. He's a psychiatrist. He has a very large channel called Healthy Gamer. I can't really figure the guy out. I can't figure out whether or not he simply likes to pontificate and enjoys it for an ego boost, or he wants to legitimately help people. It's not really clear. But he did have a video fairly recently that included a post by a woman, late 20s, who was quote-unquote above average in looks, so pretty attractive, but due to abuse in childhood, etc., was very damaged psychologically speaking, and how her looks served in this regard as a disadvantage. Now, obviously, this is a bit of an exception, because if, in fact, you're really good looking, but you're psychologically warped, there will be other factors that come into play. But more broadly, this idea that women are only quote-unquote liked for their looks, this is not exclusive to women, number one, right? This idea that X is only liked for Y. The problem, fundamentally, with this type of thinking is that when people make that assertion, whether it's men or women, although it's much more frequent that women make this assertion, the fundamental assertion here is that there's something almost mystical beneath all the layers that is a fundamental you, right? So your looks, even your personality, your quirks, your traits, whatever that might be, on some level, this is all just superficial paraphernalia that you're carrying about, and you can discard all of that, and there's some fundamental you beneath it all. But, of course, as these men are only interested in women for their looks, they're not really discovering that fundamental, whatever it might be, quality, characteristic, this essence, if you will, almost a soul, if you will. Now, these types of assertions, these types of thoughts, wholly ignore the complexities and the sheer brutality of the dating market and human interaction in general. Now, there are studies on this that show this very clearly. For example, that to at least enter a relationship, you need to have sufficient looks. There's a very, very high correlation between looks and the ability to enter a relationship. Not so much maintaining one, but to enter into it. And this ability to enter into a relationship, or even to gain an audience with other people, well, whether it's ideal or not, this will be facilitated by your looks. And then they might get to know your personality and your interests and your hobbies and so on and so forth. But at no point in this chain of command, if you will, is there any juncture where you can say, you know what, that is the real you. You cannot disentangle the specifics from the whole. And this is the problem with this thinking. This idea that there's something essential to each and every one of us that does not include this collage of traits that, at the end of the day, constitute who we are. Some of these traits are good, some of these traits are bad, and they are, at times, distributed vastly differently between individuals. Some people have a whole host of good traits and very few bad traits. Some people have a whole host of bad traits, very few good traits, and most of us are stuck somewhere in the middle, as is typical. And many times, these self-same women will be inclined to complain as they get older that men are no longer paying attention to them, or some version of the same argument, they were only being valued for their looks. But at the end of the day, we human beings are quite superficial animals, or perhaps we're not. Maybe the whole term superficial shouldn't really be used, because that's just what we are. Maybe superficial is what we are, and therefore superficial could at least be jettisoned from the context of this conversation as a lexical item. Maybe. I'm not saying we should, I'm not saying we shouldn't. But the same thing can apply to men, obviously. Men don't complain about it typically, they don't talk about it, but being valued as a utility. They don't really care about who I am as a person, they just care about what I can do for them. How is that fundamentally different? It's not fundamentally different. But it is what it is. The nature of interpersonal relationships at the quote-unquote romantic level, mate selection, it's not a charity. It's a brutal affair in certain respects. It's unforgiving. And Even in instances where you can observe that quote-unquote normal people got together and they were able to see past the superficial, oftentimes it is revealed that this wasn't the case at all. Imagine two very overweight individuals getting together, for example, and they seem content until one of them, either the man or the woman, loses an exorbitant amount of weight, and all of a sudden they look a lot better. Maybe to the point where they've gone up 2 points on the scale. Maybe they were 5s before. The woman loses weight, and all of a sudden she's a 7. And a woman who's already a 5 has a lot of options, but a 7 has a ton of options, right? And she ends up straying. But before that, both the couple and all their friends thought, they had really found each other for reasons beyond the so-called superficial. So this whole claim of being liked for who you really are is unintelligible. Who are you really, other than this strange collage, this composite of all these different traits thrown together? And for better or worse, if you have the looks, that's part of it. People's entire perception of you will change, just as, conversely, their perception of you will change if you don't have the looks. What is who you are? It makes no sense from top to bottom. And that is the unfortunate, ugly reality of human interactions. Above all, romantic relationships. They are brutal. They're framed as everything other than brutal and ruthless, but they are. I remember years ago I was together with an ex. I'd gained a hefty amount of weight. And guess what? She stopped wanting to boink me. Now, I kind of intuitively grasped that at the time, but in retrospect, years later, it's that much clearer. Relationships are not charities, right? People are not out there looking to discover the real you. They are, by dint of instinct, looking for a suite of traits that they think will be optimal for genetic propagation. Whether they choose to follow through with that wish to propagate their DNA with you or not is immaterial. That is the instinctual setting, if you will, that's driving this. That's the pre-programming. And this pre-programming has nothing to do with charity. If you fall off the wagon, gain weight, you will be judged for it. If you have an accident or an injury, you will be judged for it. If you fall ill, you will be judged for it. In fact, interestingly enough, the little data that do exist for this shows that women are less likely to leave their sick husbands than the other way around. Men are more likely to leave their sick wives. But either way, it's brutal. Relationships are not charities. Yes, sometimes kindness exists in the context of relationships, and sometimes people will make an effort in a relationship to get to know you, what your interests are, your real you, right? Whatever that means. But they only arrive at that after going through this panoply of other characteristics and traits that they demanded you have to begin with. We all know, and it's a bit of a meme, but it's true to some degree, that your looks are a part of your personality at the end of the day. It will totally shape and mold how people perceive you and your interactions. And sometimes you get tugged at by feelings of guilt. Your conscience pulls and tugs at you. Because on the one hand, for example, let's say in a relationship and your girlfriend gets fat, you don't really find her attractive anymore. You're less inclined to copulate with her. On top of that, you might be less inclined to be nice to her as well. It's a natural thing you feel. And yet at the same time, you feel bad about it. People don't realize this. It happens all the time. Your partner, your spouse gets fat, and you start treating them more poorly. Just like everyone else in the real world treats fat people more poorly than they would otherwise. And you don't even notice it. It's all subconscious. It just happens. But when you do it, you feel bad about it, and yet you cannot restrain yourself. So far more useful to this discussion would be a sincere and honest overview in the public square about how we actually operate, talking about this suite of traits that people value, rather than talking about a real you or people not liking you for who you are, whatever that even means. The who you are, if it exists at all, is so complex and so inextricably tethered to all these other aspects of your personality, your outward appearance, i.e. your looks, your height, and all these other things, that you cannot fundamentally remove one without the other. A discussion of this sort, an honest discussion of this sort, would do wonders socially for society at large, at scale. But, as it is typically the case, I'm a little skeptical it will ever happen. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. As always, please hit the like button, share, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.